Life isn't fair, especially when you can't aim your flashbang grenade. Maybe that's why we love video games so much. They give us controlled spaces with predictable rules and outcomes. Achievements, even in low-stakes environments, not only make us feel good, but they make us hopeful that we can replicate this success again outside of our screens. But for all these benefits, no gamer is immune to feeling like games are being unfair to them when they fail, even if this perception is just a disconnect between what the game is asking you to do and what you're willing to do as a player. Well, most of the time. Jaroslav Svelch, the professor of media studies at Charles University in Prague, agrees with this sentiment in his insightful essay called Should the Monster Play Fair? Perception of Artificial Intelligence in Alien Isolation. He observes that in many modern video games,
enemy AI is moreover not designed to beat the player, but to entertain them by providing an adequate level of challenge.
And that brings me to Alien Isolation proper, Creative Assembly's stealth horror masterpiece that pitted you against an unkillable alien that you could only distract or rebuff or run and hide from. Isolation was an original Alien fan's dream come true, and it's deserved all the 50-plus Game of the Year awards it won and the enduring respect of fans for over a decade now. But as well realized as its world and AI systems are, Isolation's definitely not a game I can just pick up and play. It's a thoroughly demanding and engrossing player disempowerment fantasy that I have to be in the right mindset for, so that I can withstand failure as a necessary part of the drama. What am I, English? So I can withstand failure as a necessary part of the drama, so that I can rejoice all the more when I succeed. But by the very nature of Creative Assembly's emphasis on the alien AI being more emergent than scripted, the AI is put under a lot of pressure to be convincingly dangerous, but also predictable enough so that the player has a chance against it. But as much as I enjoyed my recent playthrough on hard, I saw a breakdown in what Svelch calls the
illusion of intelligence.
Seemingly arbitrary fail states kept cropping up no matter how smartly I played, and these threatened not only my suspension of disbelief, but also my will to persevere. And so I looked to the fan presence online to see if I was taking crazy pills.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Turns out I wasn't alone, but not for the reasons I expected. A great microcosm of Isolation's fan reception can be found in Svelch's research of Steam reviews and fan discussions across forums like AVP Galaxy and RPG Codex. He found that most fan frustrations with Isolation boil down into two distinct camps of expectation and perception, those of experientialists and simulationists. The experientialist values immersion above all else, and often avoids learning too much about how the game works underneath the hood because it harms their suspension of disbelief. Above all else, they just want it to feel real, and they may even hand-wave away obviously unfair AI behavior as just being part of the fiction, like the alien is unpredictable and dangerous, therefore I can't quite explain what it just did to me. This bias that everything's there for a reason, no matter how it got there, ignores that sometimes knowing how a game works really does matter, so that you can meaningfully commentate on it and avoid mischaracterizing what you see. The simulationist, on the other hand, is all about learning the game's systems to achieve peak performance. The game is a playing field for them less so than it is an escapist fantasy, and they're likely to balk at behavior that clearly violates the rules of the game as they know them. Simulationists are hardwired to press fairness upon a game's design, but sometimes this rigidness can miss that in order for the rest of the simulation to work, some corrective action that feels unfair may be necessary. And as I play games, for fun or even just for the channel, I find myself being torn between these two camps all the time. I value immersion above a lot of things, but I find that in order for my immersion to persist, even if a game doesn't require a lot of it, the world can't be obviously punking me or messing with me. It has to be somewhat fair. But what is fair in an artificial world? Svelch echoes noted game theorist Jesper Juhl's view that the most accepted interpretation ties fairness to skill and boils down to the idea that the game designer guarantees that with enough training, the player will become good enough to overcome the game's challenges. If the AI is too powerful or too unpredictable, it carries the risk of being accused of cheating, of having quote-unquote unfair advantage over the player, as Consalvo and Fizek said. At the same time, some genres may permit more unfairness than others. Survival horror games like Isolation, for example, build on the idea that the odds are stacked against the player. But where do we draw the line between realism and the needs of the simulation to work as an artificial construct? Well, today I'm going to answer that question by close examination of the AI systems in isolation to determine if they are truly fair, and if not, does that truly matter enough to the overall experience? And what does our perception of fairness say about the entitlement we feel as consumers?
Final report of the commercial starship Nostromo.
Okay, well, let's take a step back briefly and just enjoy what isolation is for a second, and that'll enjoyably preface the headier stuff as we go. I can't gush enough about the authenticity of isolation's world, from its art style and incredible sound effects to its pragmatic but subtly clever level design. And it should come as no surprise, as Creative Assembly seemed incredibly enthusiastic about not only being comprehensive, but faithful to the source material. 20th Century Fox sent them terabyte after terabyte of high-resolution set photos, sound effects, and costume and prop reference materials from the original movie, and Creative Assembly consulted with the original movie's legendary concept artist Ron Cobb, its editor Terry Rawlings, and they even rehired some of the movie's original orchestra members to perform Isolation's score. The dev team even ran the original Alien movie on loop 24/7 throughout the entire 6-year development cycle and only used reference materials from around 1979 and before,
giving ourselves the same constraints that the original set designers would have had back in Shepperton. So if we needed to create a new kind of chair or any kind of prop, we would only look at reference material from that era. If you look in the game, the hacking tool is very much drawn from kind of Cold War technology.
Creative lead Al Hope said that there's no sense that there's a locker somewhere with a big gun that's going to be the answer to the crew's problems. Despite all this technology, it's really about using your instincts to stay alive. Hope and his Alien Isolation team often joke that the Nostromo crew members from the original Alien were the first MacGyvers, having to repurpose together various impromptu items like the motion tracker and the flamethrower to repel the alien. In Isolation, we have to duct tape all our flashbangs and noisemakers and such together in hopes it'll be enough to drive the alien off. This believable functionality to the environmental assets and the player's tools give the play experience an almost VR-like sense of being there and having to tactily put together everything to make it work. That everything you do carries consequence. Like how you can't shine your flashlight too close to enemies or they'll see you, or how the beep of your motion tracker will alert enemies if you're too close to them, or how running and shooting your gun to defend yourself may be necessary to escape humans and robots, but it will send the alien right for you. The level design also masterfully undergirds all these immersive elements because it's intelligently constructed where every room has 2 exits and a vent shaft and items to hide in or under to give you optionality and agency in how you evade your foes. In concert with this smartly open level design, Al Hope said in multiple interviews that no 2 playthroughs would be the same because of how dynamically the alien would interact with the player and the environment.
Depending on how cautious players are, we've seen encounters in Alien Isolation last well over 30 minutes in some cases, and this just can't be done with scripted behaviour. As soon as the player can predict a pattern in the alien, it stops being scary. It doesn't follow any prescribed path or set of behaviours that are telling it to do specific things. It's just reacting to the player's presence and the choices that the player makes.
So let's unpack what level of AI complexity would have to be present in order for these situations to arise and also work. Creative Assembly focused heavily on making the scenes emergent and focused on tension and release. Too little danger and the player stops engaging with the experience. Too much and they disassociate because they can't process that many stimuli. Lead game designer Gary Napper knew that if the alien were to truly mimic his on-screen counterpart, he'd probably be unstoppable. So a careful bit of balancing was done to make the alien have loud entry and exit sounds from the ventilation system to signify when you were safe or when you needed to watch out because they'd come down to your level. The alien would also make small screeches of recognition or even incline their head in the direction of a sound to indicate it had heard or saw something and in which direction it was likely planning to investigate. But this illusion of competency was buoyed not just by a smart alien, but also by help it got from the background AI known as the director. This twofold AI team isn't uncommon in AI circles. As Svelch notes,
AI researchers have hypothesized that players conceive of AI in 2 basic ways,
which are foreground AI and background AI. In standard modern video games, foreground AI usually refers to AI that the player directly engages with, like NPCs, both friend and foe, whereas background AI are quality of life systems running behind the scenes that ensure certain gameplay states like dynamic music or weather states or traffic in open world games. A well-known example of background AI in games is the director in Left 4 Dead that would send in certain high-level zombies to pick off players who are off by themselves, or would ramp up the number of spawns to increase tension against high-performing players. In much the same way, Isolation's director complements and informs the actor, or the alien AI. Together, they work to achieve what Tommy Thompson of AI in games humorously called psychopathic serendipity, which is a design philosophy that Creative Assembly used that seeks to create tension by keeping the alien in relatively close proximity to the player so as to provoke unscripted emergent encounters. And just as a note, we'll be using a good bit of footage from Tommy's 2 excellent videos on Isolation's AI as we analyze his observations and start to draw some conclusions of our own. Some of the most foundational discoveries that Tony had was that the director AI heads up this feeling of serendipity, as he knows where alien and player are at all times. It's the director's job to encourage player and alien showdowns or to ramp up the challenge through several directives, like keeping tabs of what cover the player uses over and over again, or automatically sending the alien into the player's general environment after 5 minutes or so if the player hasn't done anything to alert them already. The menace gauge keeps track of how close the alien is to the player and for how long, as well as how many times and for how long the alien's location is picked by the motion tracker. As this menace gauge fills, the director starts to upgrade the alien's directives along its behavior tree regardless of input to be more aggressive in its search, and as this gauge lowers, the director intimates to the alien that it's time to bugger off. So let's check out what the alien's basic active state is like and what it takes to either make him upgrade his behavior tree to attack or downgrade it so he'll leave the area. Like many AIs, the alien is given jobs to do in a particular order, like its active state where it searches nearby for the player. I've heard it's supposed to make the rounds inside all rooms in your general area in a random order, and will arbitrarily double back sometimes to make you think it's second guessing itself, or maybe it heard something after all. It's a clever trick and is likely to get you once or twice, even if it's technically only as effective as it feels because it's one of the most arbitrary basic directives the alien has. While searching, the alien has auditory and visual sensors that respond to sounds like footsteps or gunshots, or other AI freaking out once they see the alien. The ability of the alien to see you is based on distance and whether there's anything obstructing its vision. The alien will then modify its behavior to match the threat it senses, rushing directly to where the sound was made or right for an enemy if they're within line of sight and within a reasonable distance, and unobstructed by smoke or cover or something of that nature. The alien's sight is comprised of 4 different vision cones, a long-range one of middling size, a tight cone right in front, a wide peripheral cone, and a completely 180-degree view in close. All 4 cones have danger meters whose response times vary based on how long you stay in a particular zone and how far away you are, so whenever that meter fills, it will alert the AI and trigger its behavior tree. The long-range cone acts as more of a wide net that catches most fish but has to reel you in, so to speak, meaning you've got to stay in that cone a while for the meter to fill up before the AI will technically register your presence and attack. Smoke and darkness and long distance from the alien will help cloak you, hence why I could often be in the back of a dim room with the alien looking right at me and sometimes not get seen. I'm less clear though on instances like this one where I'm right to the left of the alien and it doesn't see me, whereas other times I can be pretty clearly out of his sight range and be detected almost immediately. Tommy Thompson's 2 AI in Games videos imply that there's a sense and a balance to the AI systems, but his descriptions never quite help me explain the presence of apparently inconsistent behaviors like how the alien will straight up ignore certain distractions and just turn around to kill you even if you're totally quiet. Despite all the information trading over the past couple years and these particularly educational videos, there's never a direct link for what might cause the alien to do things that don't quite match up with this behavior set. I'm wondering if the disconnect is that you spent too much time close to the alien and the menace gauge is filled and the director arbitrarily demands a direct confrontation with the player even if the alien hasn't technically earned it through its senses. And this really brings us to the crux of my frustrations with Alien Isolation in my last playthrough. So while the alien's basic AI design is sound and there are some great moments you can have no matter what difficulty you're playing on, there do appear to be several important cancels in the alien's behavior tree that the director can make that can feel like cheating. This feels like a direct violation of Creative Assembly's creative intent, that the director be a complementary AI who pushes the alien into their player's direction to encourage confrontation, but still leaves it up to the alien to earn its kill through its senses.
You'd be quick to think that despite it all, the game designers would still allow for the alien AI to cheat periodically by either teleporting or being clairvoyant in its knowledge. According to Bray, this is categorically untrue. Throughout the entire 12 to 18 hour campaign, the alien only teleports twice to be in very specific locations, and it's only done to enable it to appear in particular cutscenes.
That much at least I can attest to, and furthermore, I defend the director's ability to send the alien into your vicinity if the player hasn't alerted the alien in 5 minutes or so. 5 minutes is a reasonable amount of time to progress your main objectives before the alien's presence complicates things. This frequency keeps the game feeling dangerous without being oppressive, but the director starts to feel like he's unfairly influencing this battle of wits when he tells the alien things it couldn't know experientially. And that's where the experientialist side of me and the simulationist side of me agree to a truce, as both the feeling of the fantasy and the rules of the simulation are being simultaneously broken. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, and we'll start with the least offensive and work our way up into the outright unexplainable. A well-known hack that the director gives the alien is the ability to start auto-finding you in lockers or under tables if you've used this type of cover multiple times in a row recently. The developer's clear preference here is that you make use of all the different options they took the time to craft. Of course, if the player knows this to be true, it also generates this kind of meta panic where the player keenly avoids staying in rooms for too long with cover options they know that they've used recently, as they don't want to get punished by the director. Now, I assume this use different cover or you'll get caught design is meant to approximate the idea that the alien has combed through the level and not found you everywhere else, so you must be in the one type of hiding place he hasn't looked, though of course the alien hasn't actually physically checked everywhere to know this. It's another piece of arbitrary game design that feels reasonable enough to approximate instead of just outright simulate, but it is really arbitrary and actually only feels interesting if you've been told how it works. Otherwise, it feels quite ridiculous to be completely quiet and hidden and still get found out if you've just hit that cover quota. There are also some unfortunate big picture side effects to this design choice as well. Being that the alien can drop down on you very unexpectedly, you don't always have your choice of where to evade the alien, and not all areas have all the different cover options. So if you perhaps use the medical beds many times before in the Dr. Morley section of the game, and it's the only available cover in the hallway you just got caught out in the middle of, you can hide there, but you pretty much know what's coming no matter how out of sight or how quiet you've been. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't in this situation, as the director has been keeping score and concluded that you've used your maximum cover quota under beds, and that means the alien will eventually just grab you, regardless of whether you've outsmarted it in every other way. It's a hard stop that overrides any other realistic parts of the simulation. So while I understand the design choice is meant to encourage the player not to camp and just keep reusing the same locker to hide in, it's still prone to breaking down in ways that aren't really the player's fault. The director AI's cover quota persists across reloaded saves, so even if you died because you hid under the medical beds a few times too many, and you try again after that death, it won't clear it out. It'll keep holding it against you, even if you already got punished with death and the hassle of having to try again. So you'll have to switch it up on your ensuing attempts, or you'll just keep dying the same way. This to me feels like an overstep from a design standpoint, and especially so if you start to become aware of how artificially difficult this is. More seemingly unjustifiable too are these various events from my personal experience on hard that supplement these kind of increasingly arbitrary corner cases. So in the clip on screen, I throw a flare and the alien is clearly inspecting it very intentionally, like, what was that? And this allows me to pass behind it as I slowly walk, not run, towards a vent to get out of harm's way. But as I'm just a couple paces past that open doorway where the alien was, and no longer in the line of sight for that alien even if its back wasn't turned, I hear the alien do an about face and he immediately stabs me in the back before the enter vent command can be executed. So what gave him the impetus to disobey his distraction reaction and come straight for me? Was it the menace gauge going up fast because of hard difficulty, and maybe due to me sneaking around very close behind it? Is it the sensors in the back of the alien's body that are supposed to be for touch, not sight, as far as I know? I'm not sure, because there are other examples like where I'll throw a noisemaker in one direction and hide in the opposite direction, and yet the alien will completely ignore the noisemaker and come straight for me around a corner. In another instance, I throw a noisemaker down a hallway and slowly walk away. The alien pays no mind to this and drops down to kill me from behind. Now, perhaps he was close enough that the sound didn't happen before he was told by the director to assassinate me. But this feels off, especially considering this time I throw the noisemaker down the same hall he just killed me in, and he walks past me no problem and is completely distracted by it. This inconsistent reaction, especially since they're happening one after the other and you think that would be ticking up a quota of some kind, this just feels really inconsistent, especially if you consider that the alien is supposed to be responding to the quotas he gets from the director and punishing you if you rely on the same trick too many times in a row. Now, this next situation is a bit more likely to be my fault, but notice how the alien is in the animation for murdering another human who just alerted him with loud noises. And as I slink away while crouched to get into a locker to change up my cover quota and wait out this encounter, the alien is inexplicably drawn to me like a magnet and immediately gets me. It doesn't make sense that he'd be able to auto-cancel his animation killing another character, or that even if he was finished, he'd immediately be aware enough of his surroundings behind him and be able to teleport and kill me. This feels like some Menace Gage shenanigans, arbitrarily causing the alien to do things against the sense of how they should play out on screen, meaning that perhaps the background AI is being satisfied consistently just as it always is in other situations, but that this is the one time that the simulation doesn't seem to be able to project on screen a believable illustration of what's been happening. It's understandable that such things exist in theory, but it's also quite unfortunate when it happens in really tough encounters where the margin for error is so small already. Compare this to the times I'm clearly in the alien's line of sight from a realism point of view, but somehow the game has deemed me far enough away or occluded by darkness that the alien doesn't register me. Or compare it to this strange encounter where the alien walks right past me, passes its physical gaze over my position and its left foot, and somehow doesn't register me at all. In another instance, the only thing obscuring me is leaning the top half of my body behind a chair, and somehow the alien doesn't even chirp in recognition like, "That looks weird. That's all it took to fool you, my dude?" It makes me wonder what in the world this guy is actually responding to if it can seem too aware so many other times, but also have these big holes in its capabilities. Now, these problems of course don't mean the game can't be enjoyed or that the game's fundamentally broken, but my second playthrough on hard was rife with these kinds of problems, and they often came up in the middle of frustrating checkpoints that could take me an hour to pass even when conditions were reasonable, so it kind of felt like being kicked when I was down. They just don't need to exist, and judging by how generally fair and reasonable everything else works, I'm surprised that these rough areas persist across my playthroughs, and seem to get worse as the difficulty increases. I hate for someone to get stuck like I did and perhaps quit in frustration after a run where they technically did everything right as far as they could tell, but still got punished. Lord knows that when I tried to replay this game for the second time this February as it left Game Pass, I ended up putting the game down after several hours because I'd just gotten so fed up with how the AI was catching me, despite me seeming to know all the rules and be playing around them accordingly. If I couldn't trust the game to work consistently in high-risk, high-reward scenarios, it made me wonder how fair the game had been otherwise, or whether I was just getting lucky before because there was so much margin for error. But whether this feeling of betrayal is an overreaction or not, it's certainly a symptom of that central conflict we spoke about earlier, the one between the experientialist and simulationist player perspectives. Even as I find myself respecting and enjoying isolation in spite of its rough patches, I feel torn between these two ideologies of enjoyment because I can't figure out why the game seems to fall apart when it does and rationalize how to feel about it other than to just suck it up and don't get mad because it's so ridiculous that you shouldn't waste brain power trying to blame yourself. My experientialist side says the game doesn't feel right because the alien isn't acting according to the simulation's rules as I know them. My brain says that something feels off about the fantasy of it all, but it's because I'm recognizing holes in the simulation. Yaroslav Svelch observed that this line of thinking, this conflict between these two poles, was shared in many isolation forum discussions. And this phenomenon proves his point that
The reception of the game's AI depends on the representation of the entity it drives.
meaning, we as players expect AIs to act like the thing they appear to be. Human AIs need to act like people. The working Joes need to act like robots, unwaveringly responding to their programming, and we expect something like the alien that looks and acts like a raptor or a wolf or a lion to act like these predatory animals do. Svelch calls this the contained or zoological form of monstrosity, meaning that it's one we can codify, study, and expect certain behaviors of, just as if we were studying a species in nature like sharks or bears. But merely being predictable isn't enough to be realistically convincing, Svelch continues, because monstrosity also has to convince us that it's alive, spontaneous, and autonomous, that it's reached an idealized, sublime state of monstrosity. In this state, the audience accepts their inability to comprehend the mind of such a creature, much like in Lovecraftian cosmic horror. In the case of isolation and games like it, if the monster felt like it cheated or knew too much, we can hand-wave it away as experientialists do and say, hey, it is the perfect organism, and it is an alien. Who can say why it does what it does? I think its ability to hunt me down, even maybe when I can't explain it, is perfectly within its realm of capability. And I see a complementary value in both approaches here. But even if all this esoterica makes us feel better about different player perspectives than our own, it may not alleviate the frustrations of either perspective when the game seems unfair. After all, if the director gives the alien information it couldn't know experientially and uses that to kill us, like after we've used the same cover too many times in a row, or where the alien will suddenly just stop being distracted and run right to us, the alien's no longer the mysterious or unknowable monster that the experientialist can live with. It's just an obviously arbitrary computer program with an unimmersive breaking point. But it's also no longer the simulationist's carefully studied, zoological, and contained monstrosity either, but a total renegade using externally dictated instinct that it didn't earn to beat the player, and that can feel like the worst of both worlds. But if this design philosophy is deemed indefensible, what was Creative Assembly's alternative? How could they possibly win in this scenario? How could they make the perfect game that's super complex and also never breaks down? Well, we've already conceded that it's impossible to make a perfect AI that's truly alive and intelligent. Some form of arbitrariness is inherent in a closed system. The simulation has to stop somewhere. Some amount of arbitrariness is inescapable in artificial intelligence, like how the alien will randomly backtrack to previously searched areas as if he's got a hunch he missed something. That's all well and good from an immersion standpoint, but how much arbitrariness can a game systems withstand before it loses its charm? Before it loses this immersion? Obviously it can withstand some, since isolation is still a great experience for the most part, but part of me still mourns that for all of Creative Assembly's work, isolation is an awkward undertaking on the highest difficulties especially, and fairly shaky when intuitive players start tugging at the threads of how the game usually works, only to find it likes to unravel completely in high-tension situations. It's just a disappointment when that experientialist ideal crumbles before you, and the fun fantasy feels like a frustrating farce. As Kyo and Chayamana said in Game Over Man, Game Over, looking at the alien in film and video games,
Isolation's alien feels less like a ludic challenge to learn, overcome, and enjoy, and more like an intentional, unpredictable, and malicious glitch in the system to be avoided at all cost.
So we've established that sometimes the game seems to overcorrect in ways that break the immersion or feel like we're fighting the director and not the alien, which goes against the spirit of the game as the developers have described and defended it. But what's the alternative? Well, Svelch monitored several different mods that were applied to the game to make it theoretically more fair, but they had mixed results. Removing the alien entirely to make the game a walking simulator alien museum has merit unto itself perhaps, but of course this in no way solves for the frustrations that we focused on in this video, nor does it allow for the skillful fun that the game can be. A much more important and pertinent conclusion actually came from Matt Filer's experimentation inside his Open Cage tool, which recreates the Creative Assembly Game Editor toolkit that was used to modify the cathode engine that the game was made in. He found in-game code variables called exclusion radius, which would imply that there is a prescribed parameter in which the alien will always stay relative to the player so that they're not being lost back in level 1 and never showing up again. Despite Creative Assembly denying that there was a player tether, there was, but understandably so. So on the other extreme, the mod that loosens up this tether and allows the alien to roam more freely in his patrols is called the Unpredictable Alien mod by Something Else 666. My own research of YouTube comments and Reddit discussions revealed that most fans of this mod installed it because they felt like the alien monitored the player too closely and it felt contrived. making the alien feel less like an independent entity. In short, it was ruining their experientialist fantasy. Interestingly, there's also a lore justification for this as well. In Alien 3, Ripley notes that the alien won't go far from them.
How do you know that?
It's like a lion. It sticks close to the zebras.
And again, this sounds like the experientialist expectation that the game not just feel like a bunch of ones and zeros, but in pleasing that perspective, the mod makes the alien so unpredictable that the player encounters it far less often. And according to Svelch, it makes it much harder for the other parts of the behavior tree to work once he's given this much larger search radius. Now, I can imagine someone enjoying this more in theory, but circumventing the AI again doesn't really solve for any of its frustrations when you do face it, and it's likely to lose much of the drama of actually encountering the alien and having to run from it, as opposed to just sort of being like, well, maybe it'll show up. In the meantime, I'll do, 20 of my tasks to advance the story. The mod's developer even admits that there were limitations to how good this mod could be.
I really like the way the alien can have elements of randomness to its behavior. And since you can allow it to have more or less freedom in roaming and taking breaks, more freedom should equal more unpredictability. Sadly, that might also make encounters with the alien more haphazard and infrequent, so I plan on tinkering with the degrees of freedom given to the alien for a while to see if I can find a proper balance of not knowing when you'll see the alien next and where, and still being reminded that it isn't gone, but always present.
So as you can see, even the well-meaning modder can't quite account for the fact that while it might feel more true to the movie where you never really quite know where the thing is or where it'll show up, it may also just not be as interesting a game unless the director AI forces the issue more. As Svelch puts it,
the idea that the alien can be figuratively set free to become an autonomous creature proved false.
In the end, the actor still needed his director to put on a convincing performance. That doesn't then absolve Creative Assembly of the negative side effects of an all-knowing director colluding with the alien to punk the player, but it does make it more understandable why they took these shortcuts. Game development is hard enough without having to constantly simulate complex decision-making states of a living being, and having to make them convincingly realistic in their expression, and to be subject to counterplay. So the only variable that I can't personally account for that seems the likely culprit behind a lot of these inconsistencies is that menace gauge. The raw algorithm behind the scenes that's accounting for you being too close to the alien, how many times it shows up on your tracker, and all these different things. It also seems to affect how fast the danger gauges and the vision cones fill up too. What I find interesting is how hard it is to pin down why the AI can seemingly break down in some obvious ways.
As the difficulty increases, the xenomorph spends even less time in backstage mode, the menace gauge durations are increased, and the patrol region relative to the player tightens.
Even Tommy Thompson's fascinating AI in games videos on the topic are full of general descriptions of systems without a lot of specificity that would allow us to account for some of the apparent inconsistencies. But I doubt that's Tommy's fault, as his observations are informed by multiple developer interviews, a presentation he watched from the lead AI director Andy Bray, and Matt Filer's control experiments in the pretty accurate OpenCage toolkit. Even with all these resources, Tony's not been afforded a deeply specific understanding of what exactly is happening behind the scenes other than general directives. Or perhaps these individual directives on the behavior tree just aren't that interesting to list in detail in his video. But the point is that we don't have a lot to go on despite speaking to the makers of these systems and seeing all the analysis and discussion over a decade from dedicated fans and modders alike. So that kind of sounds like we're back at square one, doesn't it? Just sort of accepting that Alien Isolation, for any of its proposed faults, is still the best approximation of both player fun and developer intent, because at best, the amount of tinkering it would take to perfect the alien's rough edges apparently would take so much careful identification of the problem, and then even more delicate balancing to make it work thereafter, that it's probably an unattainable, or at least unreasonably difficult ideal to fully realize, so maybe we'll just have to settle for as close as we can get. The simulation has to stop somewhere. It's too bad that these imperfections seem undiagnosable, or at least untreatable, and that the general design can feel overbearing at times, but it still feels like it's the least egregious recipe that we've seen so far in over 10 years of modifying the building blocks of the game. So, all that to say, while Isolation may not have gotten any better over the years per se, has anyone else innovated on the incredible benchmark that Creative Assembly achieved? Well, I just finished Amnesia the Bunker, a game that I initially didn't like, ironically for the same reasons of the AI finding me even where I'd been hiding in perfect silence. It felt like Isolation's worst moment all over again. But I don't think the beast AI in the bunker is anywhere near as complex as the aliens, though the innovation of showing flickering lights when the beast is nearby is a really cool update on the motion tracker idea. Now, I'll save a real in-depth analysis between these two games for the bunker's own video someday, but I'll just put an exclamation point on this one and say that Isolation's approximation of a vicious AI, however imperfect, is still leagues ahead of its competition even a decade later. So overall, Isolation still seems to stand out as the first and best in its subgenre of stalker horror after all these years. And despite Creative Assembly now apparently being the biggest UK studio with over 800 people, and despite fans clamoring for over a decade now for a sequel, they apparently have no plans to make one. It'd be hard to top the first game, and you should always leave them wanting more, as they say, right? It's not like they have anything to prove anyway. I mean, Isolation's so good that it's easily in the top 5 Alien franchise assets, period, including the movies. And speaking of the movies, the new Alien Romulus movie that comes out August 16th looks like a really welcome return to the original movie's form. An isolated ship full of underpowered people being terrorized by a small number of aliens. Base horror that just isn't action horror is going to be really cool to see back in the franchise's wheelhouse. And the good news is that if you come out of that movie wanting a really great approximation of that same feeling, you can always just watch the original movie or play Isolation again. Hopefully, it'll be a simulation worthy of even the most fanciful experientialist persuasion. And speaking of those two perspectives, if I just wind up in Isolation's camp regardless, no matter how much I complained or tried to figure out where my biases came from, was I just idly shouting my angst to the heavens in hopes they'd move for me? Was it all just sound and fury signifying nothing? I don't think so. It's a bit like seeing those majestic planetary bodies just outside the Sevastopol's window that seem to suggest a grander, more beautiful, more good design for the universe, and yet they can't hear you scream. They know nothing of your plight. There are a lot of places in everyday life that don't have any time for your seemingly frivolous introspection and search for meaning. But don't despair if you pay attention to the small things and regularly seek to justify your feelings about them. Now, as I played Isolation and imagined myself in a spaceship orbiting around these heavenly bodies, I'm reminded of that scientific principle that says that all motion is relative. For instance, if the Sevastopol were in orbit around this planet we see outside the window, the player might perceive the planet to be moving around them because relative to the ship, we're standing still because we're in constant motion relative to the ship. Similarly, even if the world outside appears to stand still even as we attempt to shake meaning from it, we may find that our toil's not in vain because we are the ones who have been moved after all.
Last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.
Thanks for tuning in. And like any good station worth its bandwidth, I'd like to give a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by becoming a patron. I'm talking Mark Neubauer, Dead Forge, Shantiva, Hey Blondie, Yak Show, M, Bibby Effin Blocksberg, and Melancholy Geek. And an extra special thank you to those subscribed to my highest tiers. The Nth Review, James Wyatt, and Hot Hamlet. If you'd like to keep on what few lights I have here, you should join these folks at patreon.com/high-functioning-medium, or become a YouTube channel member, or donate at Ko-fi or PayPal. Also, check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to support this station with no cost to you. God bless you, everyone, and I'll see you soon.